the biggest name in college kicking and thinking that will translate?
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, the answer is that absolutely yes. I've mentioned this before when we talked about Jason and us bringing Jason in and drafting Jason, and certainly with Greg as well. Neither of those guys had necessarily great field goal percentages in college, but there's so much more to that position. The short answer is this. Number one, it's a very hard transition at the position from college to the NFL, maybe more than people would give it credit for. Maybe one of the hardest transitions, maybe aside from quarterback, because of many reasons. The hashes are different. The football is different. The yardage that you hold the snap spot is a lot of times different, another yard. There's many, many factors that factor in. Your operation changes. You have a different holder, a different snapper. There's a lot of variables that go into it. And so, yes, a lot of times there might be a guy, quote unquote, on paper that might seem like the best choice. But I think when you dive in deeper and you're looking for guys that transition better from college to NFL, I think that's what we've tried to do here. Is kind of look for the best fits there, and so I think that's why sometimes you see maybe the named guys, if you will, sometimes maybe don't pan out because of that transition. And listen, there's those guys you mentioned are very talented. It's not just talent alone at that position that gets it done. There's a lot of other factors that go into it: mindset, the accuracy, all those things that I mentioned earlier. And so, it is a difficult task for those guys a lot of times to transition from the college to the NFL game.
When you have a situation like Matt Hack where he gives you such great field position, how unique is that to get it from a punter for an entire game?
Yeah, it really was. He was lights out. I mean, he just had a fantastic game. I think, going in, obviously we felt like that was going to be and it's every game, don't get me wrong, but we made it actually a big deal last week about the field position and, certainly the quarterback we were playing against last week and trying to make him go some long fields and things like that. And Matt was a weapon. And, sometimes you get 2 or 3 shots inside the 20 to have 5 in one game, and really it was 6. Statistically, it's not 6, but he had 6 punts. And all 6 of the drives that the Jets started off, the next possession, all started off inside the 20. The 6th one was a penalty. And so got blocked in the back right in front of the returner, and they actually started the drive, I think, if I'm not mistaken, inside the 15-yard line on that one as well. So he was really 6 for 6. Statistically, he gets credit for 5. But just a really, really good job. There's a lot of game plan that goes involved with the punt game. The direction, the hang time, the location, the distance, all those things. And he was just really just had a really tremendous game. The incredible thing about Matt Hack is I've said this before, and I'll continue to say it. I actually think that he still has room for improvement. As good as he's been, and as good as he was last Sunday, he's a guy that's really, in my opinion, still just scratching the surface. He's a very talented guy. The finer points of his game, I think he really improved on in the off season. Kind of we're seeing that. Last Sunday is kind of evidence of that.
What's the next step for him? Just consistency.
Yeah, last year, we've talked about this a little bit. Last year I thought he started the season really well, and it's a long haul for rookie punters. Those guys really punt for about 18 months in a row because of their training and they're getting ready for the combine, and they really never have a break. And so I thought he hit a wall a little bit last year. I don't want to call it a dead leg, but he lost a little bit of juice, a little bit, if you will. And so this year, kind of the training regiment's a little bit different. His yearly, his annual kind of process was a little bit different. And certainly the consistency, yeah. And I think that's so far what we've seen so far from training camp till now. He's been, much improved in that area. So
I wanted to ask you about what I call the dreaded trio.
Yes. Yes, 34, 35, 38.
Yes.
All right.
Very important guys in terms of the roles that they play. How much do you rely on them to sort of be the guys that make things happen on that unit?
Yeah, great question. Well, obviously, Walt's, certainly been a leader for us now these last couple of years, and he kind of leads the charge of that group. But, Sonoris is a guy that really came on a lot last year and was a guy that really played a very, very solid football, very consistent football, was fast, physical, and now add Brandon Bolden to that mix, a guy that's obviously had a lot of background. We talked about that last week, a consistent player, a guy with a really good background in that area. And so those 3 guys, all in their own right give us maybe some different jobs, but they all give us productivity, and all three of those guys are a very, very integral part of what we do.
How do you figure out what is the best role for each of them on each unit?
Yeah, it's a week-to-week thing. A lot of times we game plan it. Special teams overall is a little bit more of a matchup game than offense and defense. You're matching up, one-on-one situations. You're trying to get those guys. The good thing about all three of those guys, they give you a lot of flexibility. They can give you a lot of position flex. So you can move those guys around, which we do in all the phases. And so especially the kick game, kick return game, then the pump block return game. Those guys really give you. They can be matchup nightmares for the opponent at times. You can get in position, and by the same token, they can really be they can work in your favor in the blocking schemes and things. They can match up on different type of bodies, and so having that position flex in that, especially in that aspect in special teams, is a huge deal. Not being a one-trick pony, if you will.
So you go into a game and you kind of use Walt like a chess piece?
Really every player in that aspect, from that aspect rather, is like a chess piece in terms of making matchups and trying to figure out, number one, how we're going to defend our opponent, number two, how we're going to attack our opponent, and try to get those guys in positions where they can make the most amount of plays. And so, a lot of times they're not locked into one spot. If you use the kickoff game, for example, a lot of times you'll see those guys line up in multiple positions based on maybe where our opponent's lining up, what their scheme is, and things like that. So it's definitely a little bit of a chess match for sure.
How did Armstrong do, and how is McAvoy doing?
We'll start with Armstrong. That's a unique situation we got going on right there at corner. We're trying to, week to week, it's kind of a competitive deal we got going on to see who's going to be active. I thought, last week he got a chance. I think I mentioned in here, I thought he was one of the most improved players throughout training camp from when we started back in the spring. He got his first shot the other day. I think he played 14 or 15 snaps and really graded out pretty well. I thought he did, for a guy that jumping in there for the first time in his first real NFL game, not counting the preseason games. I thought this guy graded out pretty well. He played fast. It didn't seem like it was too big for him, and so that was a really positive step. McAvoy's another guy that can play a lot of spots, and has played a lot of spots for Seattle the last couple years. You saw he had a tackle last week on the one punt that got returned. He was the guy down there making a tackle. And so he's a guy that came right in and kind of quarterbacked our punt team those first couple of games. And as the PP, that's the guy that kind of making all the calls. And so he's a guy we've also moved around. And so, again, another guy that can wear a lot of hats, and it's kind of why we brought him here.
Darren, how did Kalen Ballage grade out on special teams in preseason?
Well, obviously, Barry, he missed a couple games in the middle, so it was game 1 and game 4. In game 4, he actually played very well on special teams, and we had him play multiple positions in that game on purpose, because we hadn't seen him in 2 games and kind of wanted to see what he could do in different situations. He does have a little bit of a special teams background. He's one of those players that is a rare kind of bird, if you will, because he's a running back that played special teams in college. There's not a lot of those, especially coming out of the Power 5 conferences. You don't see a lot of running backs playing on core teams, especially in the coverage. And so he did have a little bit of a background there. His college special teams coach is a former NFL coach, guy that coached special teams coordinator in the NFL for the Packers. And so he's a guy that had a really good background coming in. And so very, very happy with him. He's in a position right now. Obviously, it's a very competitive position. We mentioned some of those guys, Bolden, Perry, that are giving us special teams reps. And so, certainly he's done nothing wrong. It's just certainly a situation where he's just got to stay on top of his stuff, and he's going to get eventually, just like Cornell, he's going to get an opportunity here, whether it's this week or moving forward. And I expect good things out of him because he's really got a good foundation.
On the Armstrong Tankersley dynamic, the week of competition, does that also include how they perform in practice on special teams, or is it who's the better quarterback, and then that person will play special teams on Sunday?
It's definitely a combo. Definitely a combo. Obviously, you look at our cornerback position, X and Bobby and Torrey and Tank and Cornell. Certainly the guys that are 3, 4, and 5, their special teams role is definitely a huge part of that. And it's also a constant conversation with the defensive staff on, what they're doing game plan-wise. And so it's definitely a combination. We want to make sure that, if they need to go in on defense or they're playing on defense, we're giving them the best shot. And certainly on special teams, we're giving ourselves the best opportunity, too. The good news is it's a competitive deal. It's not like you got one guy who's, so deficient in one area and not the other. And it's not that kind of thing right now. It's a close battle. It's a week-to-week thing. And I think it's healthy, to be honest with you. And the competition makes everything better. So I kind of like where we are with that position.
Thank you, sir.
All right, guys.
All right, thank you.